Welcome to my True Scary Story channel. If you're new to my channel, please be sure to subscribe now for future content and hit the bell so all of the notifications are on. That way you don't miss a single thing. Please be sure to smash the like button as it helps this video reach more viewers like yourselves. If you would like to have your story featured on an upcoming video, email my email in the description box below. Sit back, relax, enjoy, and stay sinful. You may remember this eerie tale because it's recent and it was very highly publicized. A New Jersey family sued the previous owners of their home after they received 3 disturbing letters from someone who called him or herself the Watcher, who was fixated on the 1905 colonial-style home and its new occupants. The unidentified letter writer certainly had a spectacularly creepy way with words, referring to Derek and Maria Brodus's 3 children as the young blood you have brought to me, and asking things like, "Have they found out what's in the walls yet?" You can read the entire lawsuit, which is filled with nightmare material. The lawsuit, which is still in court, was filed after the Brodus family abandoned the home, fearing for their lives. Its basis is that the previous owners knew about the Watcher, but didn't bother to warn them ahead of time. The house was put up for sale in February of 2015, but the listing was removed once the story began receiving attention. The Brodus family made a bold move, according to NewJersey.com. Since nobody wants to pay $1 million for a house that has such a strange stigma attached to it, they applied for a planning board permit to tear the house down and replace it with 2 new dwellings. That's one way to deal with their financial burden while their lawsuit is still in court. And as a bonus, it's a tidy FU to the stalker as well. In August of 2006, just before the start of their senior year in high school, a group of girls were driving around their hometown of Worthington, Ohio. The boring night was suddenly filled with exciting potential when they decided to cruise by what the local kids called the spooky house, a rundown dwelling with an overgrown yard that was perfectly situated across the street from a cemetery. The teens thought it was abandoned. They were, unfortunately, quite mistaken. It wasn't the first time 41-year-old Alan S. Davis, a recluse who lived in the house with his elderly mother, had been beset by unwanted guests. He thwarted a couple of break-ins in 2006. He had a rifle as protection, and when he heard the girls outside, he figured he'd fire off some warning shots, since it had worked before. But this time, a wayward bullet struck 17-year-old Rachel Brzezinski in the head. Miraculously, she survived. An ensuing case divided the community. Some people believe Davis was likely mentally ill, but still acting within his rights to protect his property. In 2009, Davis's mother died in the home while her son was in prison serving his 19-year sentence. In 2013, Brzezinski's family said that the young woman was 90% recovered from her injuries. That same year, the spooky house was purchased at an auction by new owners who were determined to completely renovate the place. A Google Earth search proves they did an amazing job, though there is no hiding that view of the cemetery. In July of 1976, 26 kids aged 5 through 14 were on their yellow bus heading home from their second-to-last day of summer school in Chowchilla, California. The mood was festive, until an apparently broken-down van blocked the road, and masked men with guns burst through the front door of the bus. The children and their driver were soon herded into a pair of vans and driven around for 11 hours in stifling heat, eventually stopping at a rock quarry near Livermore, some 100 miles north of Chowchilla. The ordeal only got stranger and scarier from there. In a 2015 look back at the case, CNN spoke to a number of the kidnapping victims, including Linda Carreo Laboria, who was in 4th grade at the time. The kidnappers asked each child's name, age, address, and phone number. They also took a piece of clothing or a belonging from each student, but the gunmen never explained why they were abducting the children. I only recall them ever telling us to shut up and be quiet, Correo said. With only some construction lights illuminating the dark quarry, the kidnappers ordered the children and the bus driver into what looked like a massive grave, a moving van hidden underground. It was buried into the earth. It was like a tomb, Correo said. It was like a coffin. It was like a giant coffin for all of us. Each hostage had to descend a ladder into the back of the hidden vehicle, which had been transformed into a crude holding pen for the group. There was minimal food and no ventilation. After 16 hours, the only adult present, driver Edward Ray, and some of the older kids came up with a plan, stacking mattresses as high as they would go, shoving through a metal plate on the roof of the van, and digging their way to freedom. The kidnappers who snoozed through the escape weren't hard to track down. One of them was the son of the man who owned the quarry. All three men hailed from wealthy families, so their motive for the crime, a $5 million ransom they never got to demand, since the Chowchilla police were taking so many calls from the frantic parents of the school children, remained somewhat baffling. Their attorney explained it as, they're greedy. Two of the kidnappers have since been paroled. The third, who's had a tumultuous time behind bars, is next eligible in 2018. Survivor Jennifer Brown Hyde was just 9 years old in 1976. Last year, she told CNN that the experience still haunts her. Albert Fish was a child molester, torturer. He had a set of what he referred to as implements of hell, including a meat cleaver, serial killer, shit fetishist, cannibal, and self-mutilator. But he had one more nasty trait that elevated him from monster to something even worse: his urge to gloat. Witness the obscene anonymous letter he penned to the mother of his last known victim, 10-year-old Grace Budd. It's addressed to Dear Mrs. Budd, and that's the only polite thing about it. Here's the worst, most gruesome part, and you seriously may want to skip reading it. Here goes. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then, I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. Police were able to trace the letterhead used by Fish to send his toxic missive leading to his arrest. He confessed, and in 1936, he was executed in Old Sparky at New York's Sing Sing prison. That bastard. I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. I spent a lot of time outside and I loved all animals, including bugs, frogs, and lizards. My little brother played a lot of sports on some weekends, so I was always dragged to his games, and after school I often had to attend his practices. It was soccer season and I had to go with my mom to one of my brother's soccer practices after school. I was probably 8 years old or 9 at the time, and I am female. It was a local park surrounded by some wilderness and hiking trails. I liked this park because off to the side of the soccer fields was a creek with frogs and stuff. I'd love to go over there and look at them and try to catch them. It was evening time and the sun was setting. But there's still plenty of light left. I told my mom I was going down to the creek to catch frogs. It was down the hill slightly from the fields, and obscured by some bushes and shrubs, but there was a clear dirt trail that ran alongside the creek. I scurried on down there and was carefully studying the creek looking for frogs, when suddenly a man's voice startles me. "What you looking for?" I looked up and see a middle-aged man, dressed in typical office business wear, button-up shirt, slacks, and dress shoes. He was standing on the trail, blocking my route back up to the soccer fields, looking at me and smiling. I was a cautious and shy child, so I just looked at the man and didn't reply at first. My spidey senses were already tingling, and I remember feeling very nervous and uneasy. I sometimes saw hikers on the trail by the creek, but his outfit and appearance told me he wasn't a hiker. He then asked me, "Are you out looking for butterflies? I saw some down there," as he points further down the trail, away from the soccer fields. I just said no and started looking around at what my options were. I felt the need to get out of there, fast. But as I mentioned, he was standing on the trail, which was my route back to the fields. There were thick bushes on the hillside between the trail and where the fields were. I started making my way up to the rocks to the side of the creek towards the trail, further down from where he stood, and to my alarm, he started moving down the trail towards me. "Need some help?" he said. I was now starting to panic. Although nothing had happened, and he seemed friendly, it just felt wrong to me. I just got stranger danger vibes. I remember feeling a burst of adrenaline and fear. I shouted, "No," and booked it up the rocks, across the trail, and crashed my way through the bushes towards the field. I remember the branches scratching me, but I didn't care. I literally scrambled my way through them until I came up to the fields, and then sprinted over to where my mom was watching my brothers practice. I probably looked like hell, so she of course asked what the hell happened, and I told her. I felt like she thought I was just being paranoid though. I'll never know if this guy posed a real threat or not. He could have been just getting some fresh air on his way home from work. Who knows? I just know how creeped out I felt at the time. This happened only 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it often, and I know without a doubt, me and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I work for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorder, the mentally ill, and to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. My role with the developmentally delayed is similar to a lower-ranked social worker. One thing I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their own personal goals set for that year, similar to an IEP in public schools. One of my patients has a goal to walk and/or hike at least 1 mile 3 times a week. When I made my visit to her home, walking and hiking was what I needed to see her achieve, so she took us both on a walking slight hiking trail nearby. Her and I are actually similar in age. We're both in our 40s. As we were walking the trail, we got to the point which was more isolated. We were now walking the trail that loops around a neighborhood pond, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods and a cotton field. Her and I are walking and talking when she suddenly stops walking. I looked at her, and just as she went to say, "I have a bad feeling," I had an overwhelming feeling myself that someone was watching us. Due to her developmental delays, I felt more concerned for her welfare than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel fear. I felt a feeling of protecting her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of crunching leaves, and sure enough, a guy who looked to be in his 30s is suddenly coming out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping up towards us. There was no one else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creeping up, I knew whatever he wanted, it had to be nefarious. I told her to continue walking, giving her a head start. I don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around, stopped and looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say a damn thing. He didn't say anything, but as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I kept staring at him, then started to walk back towards my patient, so he understood my eyes were on him. Then, as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he disappeared as fast as he came, back into the woods. If he were just wanting to walk this nature trail, why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stared? Why wouldn't he just continue on his walk and pass us? This guy was clearly waiting and watching for a woman or women to go down that isolated trail. For him to come out of the woods when he did, it was clear to me that he was out hiding, stalking. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my feeling of being watched saved one or both of us from whatever that man had planned. Thank you all for watching and listening to the very end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the story selection for tonight's video. If you would like to be featured on an upcoming video, email your true scary stories to my email in the description box below. Until we meet again, stay safe and stay sinful.